It has been such a privilege to work on a project that revives 6 wonderful tartans from a period before the advent of clan tartans. 6 patterns, bringing them back from historical obscurity back and making them commercially available is, if you like, a dream come true. My name is Peter MacDonald. I'm a tartan historian. I have been researching and studying tartan for the last 45 years. I got into this, my father was an anthropologist who specialised in Highland culture, and so I, if you like, grew up with it. I taught myself to weave as part of the process in order to understand some of the techniques that you find in older patterns, such as herringbone selvages, offset patterns, etc. Because in order to study the culture, you have to live it. Herringbone selvage is a traditional technique that one finds on cloth really from the early to the late 18th century, a technique that was then given up, for want of a better word, because it had less commercial utility. This is the first time that any mill will have done runs of cloth from stock with a herringbone selvage. Herringbone selvage was a traditional technique that formed, if you like, a type of overlock on the edge of cloth. It also was a decorative piece, so normally you'd find a band about 1.5 to 2 inches wide that would have this herringbone feature. And in a while we'll look in detail at a herringbone and you can see the beauty of something that had been lost but we're now bringing back. First in the collection is the so-called Glen Afric tartan, taken from a piece that was found in the glen, a remote glen up in the northwest Highlands. A remarkable piece, a remarkable survivor, the oldest known piece of true tartan in Scotland, i.e. a pattern that has a complex design of stripes and colours in different proportions that we would associate as tartan today. The tartan has been identified or confirmed as belonging to the 16th century, done through carbon-14 testing. So a remarkable piece that dates to the reign of James V, Mary Queen of Scots, perhaps James VI. A unique survivor and an example of a pre-clan tartan, one of the very few that still exists, and work of which that we're doing some further research on through the Scottish Tartans Authority in order to try and identify exactly where the sheep were grown that produced the yarn. The colours in the tartan are, if you like, my interpretation of the analysis, the dye analysis that we found. So we did dye analysis on the original specimen, which identified 4 colours, a yellowy brown, red, green and a black or perhaps brown. The black or brown may have been a natural fleece colour or may have had some top dye on it. The only colour that we could identify the dye stuff for was the blue element of the green, which was from an indigotin, probably woad at that date. The others, the yellow and the red, whilst we could identify the colour, there was insufficient dye strength for us to determine what the dye stuff was. But that gave us the 4 colours that were used in the pattern. What was particularly interesting about the dye analysis was the quality of the dyes, particularly the amount of red in it. Red was an expensive colour, always has been. The original sample was incredibly well spun and woven. It would have been a piece of some significance at the time, so belonging to someone of status, which really then presupposes why it was buried in the first place, something that we will perhaps never know. It has been an enormous success in the reconstruction that was done early last year and has just proven just how popular some of these older tartans with no name, no association, but with a unique history can be. So having 6 old and unique tartans, it's hard to have a favourite, but I think I do. And that will be our next one, the tartan from the Royal Company of Archers. Because it's an early tartan, we can date it fairly accurately to 1713, 1714, when the Royal Company had a new uniform designed. The tartan, that we are very fortunate, there are at least 4 complete outfits surviving. An incredibly complex pattern that required quite a lot of work in order to make it fit a modern loom. It's the most incredible array of colours. We know roughly where it was woven, so probably produced in Edinburgh at the time. Very, very complex. People have tried to attempt to recreate it in the mid and early 19th century, quite badly I should say. And so to be able to produce something that is so unique and do it accurately, which required quite a lot of proportional changes to keep the pattern as a workable pattern for today's modern cloth, was a real challenge, but the outcome, the result has just been fantastic. And it's, of all the others, and I have woven the others in the past, I don't think I would ever want to weave this one. So to see it rewoven, and for the first time in nearly 250 years, is just remarkable. So woven in 1714 for the Royal Company of Archers new uniform, this was, or they were, the first regiment, if you like, or organisation, or a regiment per se, but organisation to have a uniform tartan. So before any military tartans that we know of, this is the earliest uniform tartan, i.e. a tartan for a uniform. Adopted, as I say, in 1714 and replaced in favour of the black watch tartan, nice but far less interesting, in 1789. So the account book shows it being selected in 1713, and they went out and found the weaver. They commissioned it then, it would have been started to be woven then, so I would imagine it would have taken them through 1713, 1714 to produce enough for the uniforms. I would say there are, I think, 3 surviving original uniforms in this tartan, and you can see them. There's one at Blair Castle, one at Glamis Castle, and one in Archers Hall. The Jacobite Rising of 1745-46 was Charles Edward Stuart's attempt to regain the throne of the 3 kingdoms for his father, titular James VIII. It took place over a period of about 14 months and culminated in the Battle of Culloden, the last battle fought on British soil, April 16, 1746. So a number of our tartans are associated with that period simply because it was that crucible that brought together a lot of clans, a lot of tartan, and actually heralded a change in the way of life in the Highlands, Highland culture. As a result of that, we saw the ban on Highland dress, sometimes incorrectly referred to as a ban on tartan. Tartan was never banned, but Highland clothes were. And it's therefore unsurprising perhaps that so few tartans survived, because if you couldn't wear the clothes, you then either had to use them for something else or perhaps over-dye them. You stopped making them, and so in a very short period of time we start to see the loss of a whole element of culture, of which these 3 tartans, the Moy Hall, Jacobite tartan, the Culloden tartan and the Borrodale's gift, are 3 fine examples of tartans of that mid-18th century period, using techniques which were lost until really current generations have looked to reconstruct them, as we have as part of this Genesis collection. There are a number of so-called Jacobite remnants, pieces a bit like the True Cross, pieces that Bonnie Prince Charles Edward Stuart either touched or indeed wore. Relatively few of them have a pedigree that you can prove. One that has a greater pedigree and authenticity than possibly any other, is the so-called Moy Hall plaid, i.e. the plaid, or remnants of a plaid that Charles Edward Stuart gave to Colonel Anne Mackintosh following his successful escape the rout of Moy in February-March 1746. The Prince had stayed with Lady Anne, whose husband was a Hanoverian, by the way, but she was a staunch Jacobite, raised the clan for him and the Jacobite cause, and he gave her this plaid, which became a treasured possession. She died childless in the 1780s, but before doing so, she divided the piece up amongst her supporters, or his supporters, and her friends. I have now tracked down about 30 pieces of this. Some are originals, and I'm fortunate to own a piece myself. Others are copies made in the 1800s, early 1800s, which were themselves subsequently cut up and passed off as the original pieces. And the nice thing about the original is that it includes a herringbone selvage that has a fault in it, so that if you find any piece that has the herringbone selvage with the fault in, you can be sure that it's part of the original, because the subsequent copies missed the fault. So you can always tell an original from a copy. So a really interesting story. One of those, as I say, few genuine Jacobite pieces that we can associate with the Prince, and a piece that has never previously been woven commercially. And in fact, I don't believe has been woven since the mid-18th century. Perhaps the most famous, or should I say infamous, of all the Jacobite-associated tartans is the so-called Culloden tartan, taken from a coat, the so-called Culloden coat, first produced in a book, or first shown in a book in 1893. It is invariably woven commercially in purple and gold. I've always had a feeling that those can't have been the original colours, although the book published by D.W. Stewart in 1893 said it was an accurate reconstruction. I always felt, as I say, that those colours were, shall we say, not historically accurate. I was very fortunate, perhaps 20 years ago now, to be going through Glasgow Museum, and down the end of one gallery noticed a coat which I instantly recognised as the Culloden coat. And unsurprisingly to me, the colours of the original were exactly what I expected them to be, i.e. green instead of yellow and blue instead of purple. So it's on that basis we have reconstructed this tartan. Again, the first time that it had been done as a commercially available tartan, using the original shell, matching the original shades and the original proportions. And that's the other thing, that when D.W. Stewart did his reconstruction, not only were the colours wrong, but the proportions were way out compared with what they should have been. So this is the first time, again, that a tartan, an old tartan, has been done commercially in its original form, colours, size, pattern, etc. So the original coat is beautiful, clearly a gentleman's coat, very finely woven, beautifully made. What we don't know is who it was made for or worn by. We know, and I've been able to track it or trace it back to the mid-1800s, and I know who owned it then. I know who owned it up until about 1910. I don't know who owned it until it was donated to the museum in 1900, nor do we know who it belonged to during the period from 1746 through till about 1885. So a bit of a mystery, and one of those things, again, that we will never know. What's interesting is this is unlike a lot of surviving pieces from the Jacobite era, in that it is a blue and green tartan as opposed to something that is principally red. Most gentlemen's tartans at that time had a lot of red in them because it was a colour that denoted social status. So this and the next one we will look at are unusual in being blue, green and black type tartans. Lady Borrodale's gift, the name given to the tartan given by Lady Borrodale, Katrina MacDonald, nee MacGregor, to the prince when he was on the run. He arrived seeking sanctuary, having fled from Culloden, and she exchanged his clothes, which were too showy, if you like, for something that would more allow him to pass as one of the country. It's an unusual tartan, much like our previous example, that is a blue, green and black based tartan rather than the more popular reds that one would associate with the gentry of the 18th century. The original piece is what we would call linsey woolsey, so it's a plain weave tartan, something often associated with the West Coast, or almost entirely with the West Coast patterns. The original piece, of which there are 4 surviving original pieces that allowed me, through studying them, to bring together and reconstruct the pattern. Fascinating in that what is black, or should be black, actually is constructed of a series of alternating black and brown stripes, which suggests that there was a difference in the dye lot, and in order to make it work, they just randomly warped probably a ball of black and a ball of brown together, so you get sometimes 2 black and 1 brown, or black, brown, black, brown, black, brown, running throughout. The overall effect gives you a very sort of browny black, which again is a nice feature that House of Edgar have reintroduced to give you an accurate reflection of the original tartan. Something again that is not normally done, so a nice feature. The other wonderful thing about this is that there are 4 surviving pieces, so that we can be sure that this is an accurate reconstruction in terms of the pattern. The original cloth was much like so many pieces of Jacobite memorabilia, given up by the prince and later cut up and sold. And there was a collector in the 1890s who clearly owned the original piece, and correspondence from him survive in which he is offering to sell small pieces for vast amounts of money. And for our concluding piece in the collection, we have something called the Lost Tartan. For this we have jumped forward to the period of the Highland Revival, a period that ran broadly from 1780, 1782, when the Act of Repeal allowed people to wear Highland clothes again, right through till about 1830, 1840. So really up until Queen Victoria came to the throne. That period there. It was a period where there was a resurgence in all things Highland, and it also saw the period with George IV's visit in 1822 of tartan becoming a much more pan-Scottish cultural icon. We also see the beginning of the development of clan tartans, which, if you like, is where tartan went after this collection. So this final piece is taken from a coat that's in the National Museum of Scotland. Fascinating piece. It was woven by Wilsons of Bannockburn, William Wilson's son of Bannockburn, who were the great tartan weavers of that period. There are 3 known examples of surviving pieces of this in collections. It is unique amongst the original pieces we have looked at as source for the Genesis collection, in that it is a combination of principally wool, but with some silk stripes in it. The inclusion of silk in tartan was something that Wilson's did as a, if you like, unique selling point. No one else did it, has done it, or has done it since. Myself excluded, I've done it as a hand weaver, but it's technically quite difficult. This tartan's unusual in it has a lot of brown in it. Brown was a very popular fashion colour in the 1820s, 1830s, that sort of period, which is probably when this coat dates to. Quite interestingly, at the time it was being sold as, and indeed the original coat is said to have belonged to, a Jacobite, so it was being sold as something associated with Bonnie Prince Charlie. Actually, when you look at the original coat, it is quite clearly a late Highland Revival coat, as I say, 1820, 1830, something like that. There is a very similar one of a different tartan, but basically the same pattern, also in the collection. So it's a period before clan tartans, but we can see the beginnings of tartan as a fashion icon. It's where a lot of our modern tartans develop from, and particularly, as I say, the idea of the concept of clan tartans developing out of these. This one, therefore, is a unique survivor of that rush to develop new tartans as fashion patterns, as something that had, if you like, a cachet of some sort of historical connection, but that actually the historical connections were being reinvented, reappraised, reimagined at that period. And from there we get, if you like, a lot of modern clan tartans. Over the years I've been working on a number of early tartans, examining the original tracking down and examining the original specimens with a view to bringing them back to commercial parlance, as it were. Looking at some of the tartans that existed before the mass commercialization. So if I told you now that there were well over 12,000 tartans in existence, new ones every week, but the old ones are the ones that have not only an integral beauty to them, but also the ones that we're really in danger of losing unless we research them and promote them.